So it is perfectly clear why the existence of something called the State of Palestine serves Israel's purposes. The Israelis themselves have told us. The question remains why any Palestinian, other than one who would seek to benefit personally from such an arrangement, who I assume are in the minority, would ever agree to call this thing a state. The only possible reason to do so would be to accept the argument that the Palestinians are weak and that this is the best they could hope for. And by the way, fewer and fewer Palestinians accept this argument. 1/3 of the Palestinians living under occupation now favor a one-state solution, although it's not officially in anybody's agenda. But if Palestinians are weak, that is so not least because, since 1993, they have been accepting an Israeli narrative, a narrative which, as I've said, has little or nothing to do with actual realities, and, moreover, a narrative that depends crucially on Palestinian affirmation. In other words, the Palestinians have helped to make themselves weak by continuously affirming the Israeli narrative, and in particular by accepting that the trappings of sovereignty that they've been given as essential features of the Israeli narrative are laying the ground for the supposedly, but not really, independent Palestinian state that they will one day have once Israel's final solution to the Palestinian problem has taken place. I refer, for example, to the very existence of something called a Palestinian government that claims to have a parliament and ministries and many of the other attributes of power that normal governments have, although it just doesn't have a country, which most governments do. The time has come, I think, in fact I think it's long past time, for the Palestinians to de-link from this Israeli master narrative and, in a unified voice, to present their own narrative to the world, one that would have the supreme advantage over the Israeli narrative that it is actually in keeping, rather than at odds with, reality itself. Here is what they could say, for example. There can be no government without a state to govern. And just as there is no Palestinian state, there is no Palestinian government. Some Palestinians live in exile, others as a reviled minority, and others under military occupation. But we are one people, and we will accept no solution that does not offer us justice as one people. Israel is an occupying power that has grave responsibilities for the people on whom it has chosen to impose a military occupation for 4 decades. Israel is denying the fundamental human and political rights of the Palestinians to whom it has granted nominal citizenship, as is obvious from its neurotic and even, I would say, obscene discourse of demographic crisis. And Israel is denying the fundamental human and political rights of those Palestinians in exile who have the right to return to their homeland from which they or their parents were violently expelled in 1948. We are willing to share the land with Israel's Jews and to live with them in peace and justice, but we insist on a government for all of us that is genuinely democratic and secular and that treats all of its citizens equally before the law. In short, we Palestinians demand our right to live as normal human beings and in accordance with the accepted norms of the 21st century, period. In keeping with the universal standards of justice and international law, such a narrative is much more powerful than the self-inflicted weakness of the Palestinian narrative that begs for mercy from Israel. But that is not its only merit. It would also undo the current Israeli narrative, the scenario, as Vice Class calls it, and throw it into, I think, a panic disarray, of which the hysterical reaction to Jimmy Carter's book offers the merest foretaste. But don't take my word for it. Here is Prime Minister Olmert again, speaking now in November 2003, and explaining the then unfolding Sharon scenario. Quote from Prime Minister Olmert: "There is no doubt in my mind that very soon the government of Israel is going to have to address the demographic issue with the utmost seriousness and resolve. This issue, above all others, will dictate the solution that we must adopt. We don't have unlimited time. More and more Palestinians are uninterested in a negotiated two-state solution because they want to change the essence of the conflict from an Algerian paradigm to a South African one, from a struggle against occupation in their parlance to a struggle for one man, one vote. That is, of course, a much cleaner struggle, a much more popular struggle, and ultimately a much more powerful struggle." That's Prime Minister Olmert talking about what the Palestinians could do if they shifted their paradigm. For us, it would mean the end of the Jewish state, he says. So, to my mind, the question is, what are the Palestinians waiting for? Israel has made clear what its intentions are. It has revealed over and over again its darkest nightmare. which is a democratic and secular state. I mean, the mere idea that a democratic and secular state, which is generally thought to be the ideal state form in the 21st century, is thought of as a nightmare for Israel, that in and of itself speaks volumes, I think. So the question is, why should the Palestinians continue to play along in the self-mutilating role assigned to them by an Israeli narrative of domination, when they are in a position to throw that narrative into total disarray, especially when all they have to do in order to do so is to claim rights that even Israel acknowledges it would be difficult or impossible to go on denying them forever. I look forward to discussing this with you in the question period, but let me, in anticipation of our discussion, say one last thing. Although it depends absolutely on Palestinian affirmation, the two-state solution has become a key component of the Israeli narrative. In affirming it, then, the Palestinians have been serving Israel and weakening themselves. It is time for the Palestinians, in one voice, to announce the termination of the two-state solution. Israel should be revealed for what it is, a nakedly racist settler colonial enterprise premised on the creation of a state for one people at the expense of another people, and in a way that might have been acceptable in the 18th century, but is totally unacceptable in the 21st century. The point here is not that the one-state solution is something that needs to be worked out in advance with interim agreements and committees and subcommittees and so forth. It is the reality today. There is only one state today. The one-state solution was put into effect in 1967. There is one government ruling differentially over two groups of people living on one land, granting to one group rights that it systematically denies to the other. All that has to happen for the world to recognize this is for the Palestinians to say that it is so, and thus to bring language and reality back into alignment with each other as though for the very first time. Thank you.